Your sales processes, okay? It's vital to know what are the key steps to your sales processes. The first thing I go back into is when somebody walks in the dealership, what do? Okay, you meet them. Okay, does that ever not happen? Okay, all right. So we all know that. I tell people meet and greet. Well, gosh, Bob, that's just obvious. Well, I've been in dealerships before. That hasn't happened, right? So that's what we have to do. And who's the person primarily for making sure that happens? And I tell people it may not be the salesperson. Many times I instruct the people at the parts counter, say, I know you're not selling, but people's natural tendencies when they come into the dealership is to look at the what? The parts counter. So my parts people are the person that I would say part of your job at the parts counter is just to make eye contact. Even if I'm working with them, I say, excuse me just a second. Hey, thanks for coming in. One of our salespeople will be with you in just a second. So, right? I said that normally is one of the things that I would have the people at the parts counter responsible for. Now, if there's a salesperson out on the floor, then they don't have to worry about it anymore. But in the parts department, how many times can we see that everybody's busy? Everybody's tight there. So I tell people again, it's one of those things. I can interrupt my conversation with a parts customer for a moment, make eye contact, make a greeting, say, hey, one of our salespeople will be with you just in a second. Just take your time or enjoy yourself or whatever like this. But again, does that make a difference if they notice that you noticed them? And I tell people, so my parts counter is kind of my first line of meet or greet in our dealerships. Qualify people, identify the customer needs and decision makers and budget. How many of you guys have a preset qualification process in place? You've got to have this, because you know what your salespeople do? They'll end up spending 45 minutes talking to somebody about a piece of equipment, and then 45 minutes into it find out they can't get financing. Okay, so how depressing is that? So we got all the way down. You're the decision makers. This is the right product, Don. I get down and we're sitting down doing the numbers now, and you can't get financing. We ask about information like that right up front. Say, I know you haven't made a decision to buy yet, but if you did this, you think you'd pay for it? Or would you want to use financing? No, we'd want to use financing. Well, why don't we do this? Let's go ahead and sit down and just take a moment and see how much you what? Qualified for. Well, I just filed bankruptcy last week. Well, let's talk about that for a second then, okay? Because at that point, we're going to say no. It's, so I said, take your time, look around, but I'm just going to be honest with you, right? You're probably not going to be able to get what? Financing. I don't want to run them away, right? I want to still be nice to them. I want to be courteous to them. But at that point, the sooner I know what they can do with their finance, the better it is for me as a salesperson. And I see salespeople, and I'm going to put my hand up. Guilty as charged myself. I've been selling since 1973. I've done this before, right? And I tell people again, you've got to get out early on in your qualification process, your capacity to actually pay for something. Because again, a person that's qualified is that, number one, they have a what? Well, okay, they have a job. Okay, number one, they have a need for what we have. I always tell people, qualifications, back to the basic three. They have a need for what we have. They want to buy it in the time frame I want to sell it in. So in 3 years, my wife and I are looking at buying a farm, and we want to take a look at a Kubota. Well, 3 years, you're not, right now we live in the city, you're not going to need one. So again, doesn't mean I would run you away, but I would handle you differently if I were a salesperson and say, well, let me start you on a couple that you may want to look at. I've got a customer over here I'm going to work with, but don't leave. I'll come back and here's a brochure to work with. So because they have a need for what we have, they have the time frame that we need them to buy it in, and they have the ability to get what? Money. I tell people, if I got all three things of those in place, game on for me as a salesperson. So what's your qualification process? What's your process for demoing or doing a walk around on the equipment? How many of you in here are in sales? Okay, how many of your salespeople practice doing walk-arounds? Okay, if very good. If they're not, they should be. Because I tell people again, most salespeople don't practice until they find somebody that wants to buy from them. Be like a doctor going, I'm a brain surgeon, you're my first. Kind of excited. Yeah, everybody up to this point has been dead that I worked on, so I'm excited to see what I can do here. I tell people, we in sales don't practice on people that can buy from us, we practice on people who can. You should be practicing your walk around all the time. If I've got an L-Series Kubota out there, then I need to practice on walking around. How do I take a person through this process of doing this walk around? It could be a chainsaw, a string trimmer, it could be a walk-behind mower. Doesn't make any difference what it is. But what's your process for doing a walk around? Where do we start at with the walk around? Well, we always start where? At the front. Then we go to the driver's side. Then we go to the back. Then we come back around to the other side. And then we end up back in the front. That's a walk around. Okay, so then what are you going to talk about when you're in the front of an L-Series Kubota with a loader on it? What are you going to talk about when you're at the side over here and you talk about the cab and the operator features? What are you going to talk about? Well, I'm just going to tell them that it's great. Well, that's not going to do it, okay? So what's your process there? Make the offer, summarize the customer needs and the product they've seen. You guys have that process set down. So why don't we come back to my office? Let's come back and do this, right? You do that. That's where you do your negotiation. Do you have negotiation things you guys negotiate with? We never negotiate with cash. We negotiate with parts or service. Why did we negotiate with parts or service instead of cash? What's $500 of cash cost me? $500. What's $500 of parts or service cost me? About $250 to maybe $300. Are you better off to negotiate with parts and service than cash? Yes. So all of you as managers, sales managers, do you already have negotiation packages set that your salespeople can use? No. So they come in and they beat you up on price, and I give away $500. By the way, it's $500 of gross or net profit. Net. So if you've got a 5% profit on the machine and I give away $500 in net profit, how much more do I have to sell to get that $500 back? And I tell people that's the reality. When you give away cash, you're giving away net profit, and it's hard to get that net profit back. Why, by the way, would I prefer to give away service and parts? Because to use it, you have to do what? You have to come back in. Why would I want you to come back in? Because you buy more. I tell people, we know in service that if I can get the customer to come back for the first service, 70% of the time they'll let me continue to come back. You make more money servicing equipment and selling parts to it than you ever do selling it. So our primary goal is to get the equipment where? Back. Why do you think automobile dealers today give you the first year of oil changes for free? They don't really care. Oil's not that expensive. They just want that piece of equipment coming back in, that car coming back in, so they can do what? Sell you more and more and more. They make more money servicing it than they ever make selling it. All you guys are in the same situation. So we've got to get that equipment back there and doing it. And then again, the last part of the business is closing the sale, and then you take them once the sale is closed, you introduce them to who? Why would we introduce them to the service manager? Because we're trying to do what? Get that connection there. And by the way, the service manager, especially as we get into Tier 4 engines and regeneration, my salespeople don't talk about regeneration on engines. My service manager talks about it, because then if that happens and we do it right, I'm not going to have to go out there because they've been running this engine at 1,200 RPM, right? And now it won't start for them, and I got to send a guy out to go out and do it under warranty and things like this. But again, that's your sales process. Okay, and we're going to work on that in just a little bit. So you have a process for sales. And again, this is management stuff here. So each one of these things is critical. If you're an owner or a general manager, Don, Rob, you guys have to make sure that you guys have these things in place. Your job is not to create them, right? Your job is to say, okay, I want to see this and this and this. And I know your guys, they're going to fight like Satan, right, to do it. But you just have to be tough with them and say, look, this is part of what we have to do here.